Maddie Glad here, Jimmy Salgado, our nickel coach for the Buffalo Bills, and we're also pleased to have Nathan Hare with us too. He's the CEO of the Community Action Organization and a professor of world history at Medaille College, has also been a professor of Black history at Medaille College. And we want to get together to have a conversation today about systemic racism, racial injustice, police brutality, a lot of things that we're seeing in today's world, a big topic of conversation right now, but a topic that we should continue to talk about beyond the time that it dies down as a hot topic. And one thing that the NFL is doing is observing Juneteenth as a holiday this year. So their offices will be closed, as well as many other team offices will be closed. Now, I think it's important to think about Juneteenth not as a time to necessarily take the day off to sit back and relax. For a lot of people, maybe in the white community, it's important to educate and to continue to learn about this subject and our place of how we can help fight to end systemic racism, because at the end of the day, we all can play a part. So Nathan, you being a professor of world history and also a professor of Black history at sometime at Medaille College, I just want to ask you just about the history of Juneteenth. I feel like it's an anniversary that some of us may not understand the exact background on. So how do you think us as Americans should view the holiday? How do you think us as Americans should understand what Juneteenth represents in American history?
Well, you know, we celebrate the founding of the United States in 1776, even though we didn't have a constitution until 1789. So, you know, we kind of come up with, you know, these convenient dates that we celebrate things. And so with Juneteenth, you had two events. In January of 1863, Lincoln actually executed the Emancipation Proclamation. I'll talk about that in a second in terms of what the significance of that was, but the idea was supposed to be that all of the African people that were enslaved in the South, that they were now free, and you know they should be able to spring themselves away from the plantations and move on with their lives. But in reality, slavery did not end with the Emancipation Proclamation, and in fact, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free a single slave. The Emancipation Proclamation was a declaration over another country. The South had already seceded from the Union. They already had embassies in other countries. They already had trade agreements with other countries. They were completely, that's like Canada making a law to affect what you're going to do in New York City. It would be irrelevant. You wouldn't pay any attention to it. So slavery did not end with that. When Juneteenth occurs, this is when the news finally got to Texas. If you think of Texas as like the end of the territory that was controlled by the United States, so naturally it would be the last thing you would get to because they didn't have the internet, you know, in 1865. And so the news that the Civil War had been won, that the North had won, it finally got to Texas, Galveston, Texas, sometime in that period between June 13th and June 19th. Nobody knows the exact date when it got there, but a Colonel Granger was the one who came and brought the news to people. But I need for people to also understand how this plays into the discussion that we're going to have today, which is that even when the Civil War ended, slavery did not end. In fact, when Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was signed, it said in the Emancipation Proclamation that any district, state, parish, county that wanted to stay within the Union could keep slavery as an institution as long as they stayed with the Union. So when the Civil War ended, you had places in Virginia, places in Kentucky, places in Louisiana, and other places that still had slavery for 10 or 15 years after the end of the Civil War. So the 13th Amendment was passed as a way to end that in those other states that still had slavery. But I need for people to also read the 13th Amendment. If you read the 13th Amendment, it says slavery is abolished in these United States, and it has a comma. And it says, except as a punishment for being duly convicted of a crime. So in reality, slavery has been permanently institutionalized in the United States as the punishment you deliver somebody for getting convicted of a crime. So if you're a Southern plantation owner and you've lost all your slaves, but you control the law enforcement community, then you start creating laws that say if you don't have a job, that's breaking the law. If you're congregating on a corner, that's breaking the law. If you're drinking in public, that's breaking the law. If you're catching in the woods with 3 other people, you're breaking the law. And then by breaking these disorderly conduct laws, you could be enslaved and put into a chain gang. And then that just kept going, you know, and compounding itself. So it's the fact that that sort of thing continued to happen in the United States. And it was not really challenged by people all over the United States. That is what is being referred to as systemic racism that continues to this day.
Yeah, I definitely think we're still seeing the effects of slavery, of all those who have been enslaved in a lot of different ways. And this country has woken up in the last month with the murder of George Floyd at the hand of an ex-police officer. And it started a big conversation with everybody on social media, on the news, within our families, with our friends, conversations that need to happen, that need to continue to happen, that are very important, that should have happened years ago. To think that we're still here in 2020 is quite sad. But the NFL has decided to recognize Juneteenth as a holiday, as well as pledge $250 million over the next 10 years to fight systemic racism, which I think we all can agree it's a step in the right direction, right?
We should be clapping all over the country right now. Everybody should be clapping. Okay.
So while these things are positive, and it's great that the NFL is recognizing that this is a problem in our country and we need to fight to end this problem, because everybody should be treated equally, no matter of your skin color, no matter of your background. But what can the NFL continue to do to help with this? Jimmy, I want to ask you, you are a coach of an NFL team, you're a nickel coach for the Buffalo Bills. You get to deal with a lot of players every single day. A lot of those players are Black players. A lot of our players in the NFL are Black. They make up 75% of the athlete population here. So while we're seeing the NFL make some steps in the right direction, what would you like to see the NFL as well as the Buffalo Bills continue to do on this topic of conversation?
Thanks, Maddie. I think, all in all, we have to come together first and foremost. The NFL, the players, and I think they've already started to do that, and to use their voice, use their platforms that these players have. And we've already seen it come out, where we've had players come out and make videos and with some certain recommendations that they wanted to see from the NFL, and which was great. They have every right to do that, and it's very powerful because of the NFL being it's the #1 sport in our country, and it's very visible. These players are looked upon by people all across the country from all different shapes, sizes, colors, and their voice is heard, especially with our youth. And I think that is one of the things that I've seen with our guys, not only with the Buffalo Bills, but across the NFL, that are going out and using this platform that they have, able to communicate and spread the word that, hey, this has got to stop. We need this to change. It's repeated throughout history, right? We've all seen it, and it's time for it to stop permanently. And I think with them being able to speak up is a huge thing. And the NFL is listening. They've already made a great contribution, but I think also with the Bills, when we met as an organization, it all starts, right? Listen, learn, and love. And that's where it starts off with. And that's where we got to, come together, all of us together, no matter what color, race, creed, religion, whatever it may be, we got to come together. It all starts in the heart. Starts in the heart. And I think when we hit that, that's where things are going to change.
I want to speak to the topic of a platform. I think we all have a platform in some way, shape, or form, regardless of if we're getting paid millions to play a sport on TV. Nathan, how do you think people can use their platform today to educate, to put content out there, to learn, regardless of if you're an athlete or just, a citizen of Buffalo?
I think Jimmy put his finger right on the button on this. The athletes don't have to be the greatest speaker. They don't have to be, the most erudite person in terms of articulating, the whole history of things. Just the fact that they are there as athletes, as highly accomplished people. When they come into a school, when they come to a police athletic league, when they come to some youth serving organization, when they talk to people in boardrooms and Kiwanis clubs and Rotaries, people listen to them. And what they're listening for is the athlete's humanity, because that's what other people connect to. People don't really connect necessarily to your history. They like to know your history, but they don't necessarily, you don't bond with the history of somebody. You bond with the humanity of somebody. So when somebody shows you that in their life experience, they've done some of the things that you have done. They've faced challenges, overcome those challenges. They've lived a life, they've pulled it together, and they've made something of themselves. Other people, no matter what walk of life they come to, it doesn't matter whether you're an engineer or you're a football player, it's still the same path that you found yourself going through. So I find that every athlete has a platform. All young people are going to listen to you. If you're a hockey player, you're a baseball player, but definitely in the city of Buffalo, if you are a Buffalo Bills player, you're going to get an audience anywhere you go. People are going to want to talk to you. They're going to love to talk to you. And so I think that can help motivate young people to make different decisions that they make in their lives. School can seem hard. It can seem irrelevant. It can seem like it's something that you're being put through. And if you can help people to understand that the only reason why I'm in the position that I'm in is because I finished grammar school, I finished high school, I got into a college, I got people to see me playing football, and voila, here I am, and so on. That everybody's got to go down that path to get to where they're going to be as an adult. And I think every NFL player can do that, especially the ones we have here in Buffalo.
Jimmy, you have an interesting background. Your parents came from across the country, one from Peru, one from the Dominican Republic, and moved to New York City while they were young adults. Moving to America as a young adult, regardless of where you come from, it's tough to earn a living, to make a name, and to set up your family for success generations down the road. And you told me that you guys moved into the suburb at some point, moving out of New York City, which I'm sure you have experiences yourself that are similar to experiences that some in the Black community have of being profiled and treated unfairly. And we're all having conversations right now. I think both of you, I could say, are doing your part to help play a role right now in fighting racial injustice, as well as previously to this conversation and the last month. So with your background, Jimmy, what have you been doing, whether it's having conversations or talking to your players to help educate them or provide a space where people can talk with each other?
Yeah, we opened the lines of communication because it starts there. When we talked about listening and letting our players know also that we're there for them, because that's the most important thing. They want to know, before they care about what they want to know that you care about them. And this was a tough time that it's just come up. And when we were in meetings, there was a day where there was no football. No one cared about over 3 or what blitz we were running coming up against in the opener against the Jets. It was, there was guys that were hurt, and rightfully so. And what could we do to change? How could we come together, not only as a unit, but maybe as a defense and as a team, as an organization with the Buffalo Bills? What could we do to affect our community, to help in any way and make the situation better? What am I going to do? Not as look at it as, hey, things are like this right now and I'm going to get mad or get bitter, but what can we do to make the situation better? What can we do to help? And that's the things that we talked about with our players. I also had to have talks with my kids, and so that they understand what's going on, with Juneteenth coming up. I had talked to them earlier about, I was going to be on this call, and I'm making sure that they understand, right? 'Cause some of that stuff's not being taught in our schools, and we need to educate, right? Because I know I said earlier, listen, learn, and love. We got to listen. We got to learn. We got to learn from our history, and what are we going to do? Change it, right? And I really do believe it starts with the heart, and that's how it'll happen. But we have to educate as well. So.
Nathan, I want to speak to Black history because you are a professor of world history. You have been a professor in Black history. And with Juneteenth coming up and us talking about what Juneteenth means and the fact that a lot of people don't know the background of Juneteenth and when slavery truly ended in the United States, if it ever did in some ways, how can being educated on Black history from a young age change the perception that we as Americans have on the injustices in our world? Because I think that's so important, is to be educated from kindergarten or first grade on Black history. It's interesting that a lot of classrooms don't have that type of education in their curriculum still.
It's important that people understand words. If you were a Jewish person and you were placed into a gulag during the Hitler era of Germany, you wouldn't call the descendants of those Jews gulag, prisoners. They would be Jewish people who had been captured by these German Nazis. In the same sense, when we refer to African people as slaves, that sounds like we are saying that's the definition of who they were, but that's not. African people have been on the earth since the earth began. They were arguably the original people of the earth, and have been the same people all the way through today. So we need to understand this history, that it's not what were African people enslaved and then after slavery, it's what are African people, period. African people are Ashanti, they're Gula, they're Fona, they're Twa Ndebele, they're Twa Shona, they're Kikuyu, they're Maasai. African people have a history that goes back to the beginning of the world. And so we have to teach that. If you understood that, you would know that virtually all of the Roman foundation, the Greek foundation, the Assyrian foundation sprang out of the Ethiopian and the Sumerian foundation. You would understand that those were African civilizations. When you begin to understand people in terms of their complexity and what they have been in the course of the development of civilization, it changes your conception of people. They're not children of victims. They're actually children of people who were the literal rulers of the world for a very long period of time. And so it's not about ego tripping on what you used to be. It's about understanding who you really are. And by understanding who you really are, you understand what your potential is. And if you understand your potential, you don't look at other people and what they're doing with their potential. You start looking at yourself and what you can do with your own potential. And other people look at you and see what you're doing with your own potential. And so I take it back to, the conversation we're having with regard to the Buffalo Bills and the athletes. They have the ability to show people that the kind of work that you have to put in to transform yourself into somebody who can play a sport at the level that these men and women play these sports. That's what you have to get out of yourself, no matter what your role, your future role in life is going to be. You got to put that kind of energy, that kind of effort into yourself. And so we have to teach history in a way that helps people to feel empowered. If your older brother was a quarterback and he was great, and you play ball with him, in the backyard and so on, you probably think that you're a great quarterback too. When you think of Eli Manning and Peyton Manning, I'm pretty sure that Eli Manning, he got his courage and his belief in himself because the kid he was playing ball with all the time was his older brother, was one of the greatest quarterbacks that ever lived. And he had that role modeling that he could weigh himself. He had expectations based on his understanding of the history of his brother. That's what happens when you teach people their history correctly. People develop that kind of understanding about themselves, and it gives them the power to push themselves forward in their lives.
I think one thing that we're all seeing right now too is a lot of cities are crying out for police reform. Cities want change. Cities want to know that everybody is safe in that city to go about and to walk the streets and the sidewalks and to drive in a car and not have fear of being pulled over and your life being ended at that moment for not doing something that is worthy of your life ending. Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown has announced a lot of police reforms in the last few weeks, and he has said this is just the beginning of many. We're gonna work to make this community a better community. We're gonna work to make police enforcement seem less of enforcers and more of partners in our community. So a question for both of you: why do you think Buffalo can be a model for the world right now?
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Well, this community is since I've been here now going on year 4, is very knit, caring, from what I've seen everywhere through. I live in Orchard Park, but I've been around the city and have been around all different places with my kids and sports. So to me, there's that sense of togetherness. It's a tough town, tough-minded people, and where we can come together. And I really believe that, where not only the Buffalo Bills, but all of us coming together, whether we're downtown together, wherever we decide to do this, that we bring all these people together. And everyone understand that where we need to go. And with the proper education, like we're doing, with the proper people leading us, whether it's in our organization, whether it's downtown, the mayor's office, which he's taken steps already, like you said, with our police, and all of us coming together and having programs where we can, as we know with the Bills, there's a lot of times where we have our players go out with some of the policemen and take tours with them. We do stuff with the Buffalo firemen. So I think a lot of work that goes on in the community with Buffalo Habitat, building houses. I know we've had a chance to be a part of that and doing cleanups downtown. Those are the things that I've seen where when I've been to those events, you see the melting pot, the different types of people that have come together for a greater cause. And right now there's nothing bigger in our country right now that's going on besides the pandemic, obviously, but we have to come together. And I see that this town is able to do that. I really believe that. And I'm really looking forward to be a part of it and to help in any way that I can and with our organization here in Buffalo.
And just to build on that, what we really need to do is to change the definition that we've allowed to emerge as to what the police departments are supposed to be for. Police are not an extension of the military. They're not like the fifth branch, of the military. The police are public safety officers. They're public servants. Their job is to keep the peace. They get cats out of trees. They help somebody get back into their house when they lock themselves out, or get into their car when they lock themselves out of their car. Somebody's drunk as a skunk, you get that person home. You don't have to put them in jail because they got drunk. You walk that person home. You develop a relationship between the people in your communities. Now, I'll give you an example. I grew up in the Perry Projects in Buffalo, which is possibly the poorest place in the entire city of Buffalo. It's right next to the Valley community, which is, amongst the poorest places of Caucasian people in the city of Buffalo. And we fought a lot, with each other. But there was a police officer, his last name was McNamara. I only called him Mac. And I was 7 years old. I won't go back how far that was. You don't even know my age. But I was 7 years old. I tried to take a bus. I didn't know how to take a bus. And I wound up missing my stop. And I ended up maybe 2 miles away from where I should have gotten off the bus. So I get off the bus. I'm standing around the street trying to figure out where to go. How do I get home? And Mac comes by in a police car. And he asked me what was wrong. And I told him, I said, I'm lost. I got off the bus and I'm nowhere near the Perry Projects. He says, you live in the Perry Projects? I said, yes. He says, come on, I'll take you home. So I went to get into the back seat of his police car, He said, you don't have to get up there. You can get right up here in the front. So I got up in the front. I got to handle his radio, you know. We just had a good time, you know, until he got me back home. Luckily, my mother was looking out of the window and she saw me and he waves to her, she waves to him. They became friends, you know, and so on, right? Even though we were in communities that tended to be estranged from each other. What I learned from this experience, at least in Buffalo, I don't know what it is in other cities, but in Buffalo, if you found yourself where your tire blew out on your car and you're in a different neighborhood that is your neighborhood, people will come from, you know, around the block and they'll help you fix your tire. You know, they'll go find you resources. If they can't fix your tire, they'll find somebody to get you where you need to go and come back to get your car and so on. Buffalo is a very friendly place, even though it's parochial. In other words, you have mostly Irish over here, mostly Hispanics over here, mostly African people over here and so on. But despite that parochialism, people tend to be able to work with each other. They tend to like each other and so on. And so I see us reorienting our police departments so that they see themselves as public safety administrations. And then you pull together other assets that people need. So if somebody's having problems with their wife or their husband, you need somebody that can do whatever kind of counseling that person needs to get to that house. A police officer can then say to the administration, there's a house over here that has somebody who has this set of problems. We need to get somebody over there to talk to those people so that it doesn't turn into a criminal situation. It's that kind of modeling that needs to be, or restructuring that needs to be done so that we return to the mission of creating quality life in our communities that are peaceful lives, but that do not involve the police becoming like an occupying military force over communities.
I want to leave a with this question. I don't want to keep us for too long because we've had a great conversation about this topic already, but what is your challenge to people in this world right now? What would each of you like to see us do? How can I help? How can my friend help? How can the people on Twitter help right now? What's your challenge to us as a community to come together, to listen, and to fight and end this thing once and for all?
Well, Jimmy, I'm going to let you talk first.
Wow. Well, it's a great question. You know, I think, and I know I've said this before, we talked about listening, right? Be quick to listen, slow to speak, right? Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, right? I think all in all, we're all learning from each other. And these last couple of weeks have been, for me alone, I've been online and reading and learning things and stuff that has happened that, you know, I hope that everyone else is doing that so that we can educate ourselves, because that's where it all starts. And we got to communicate. There's going to be some uncomfortable conversations. It's just part of it. And one of the examples, I'm not sure if you guys have watched it, but Emmanuel Acho, and now going to work for Fox, but he started the uncomfortable, you know, conversations with a black man, and he's had 2 episodes. I believe the 3rd episode's on tonight, and just to sit there and listen to that, you know, and I think, you know, we all need to educate ourselves, and we need to be able to have those tough conversations. You know, and I think the more we do that, and to not feel uncomfortable, you might feel uncomfortable. I'm being realistic here. We're going to feel uncomfortable, but that's part of it. You got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. We tell our players that all the time, right? Getting ready for you got to learn how to be uncomfortable. Everything's not going to be roses, you know, and all good and dandy. So I think, you know, when I go back to being quick to listen and slow to speak, you know, keep learning, keep sharing with one another, be there. You know, you might have a sense that someone's not doing well, and maybe reach out to that person. How can I help from my end, from my point of view? Or you might see me down and maybe ask that person, you know, what's going on? Is there something wrong? What can we do to communicate and to be on the same page? And don't be afraid to open up your heart, because it's going to come down to that. And that's how we're going to change our society. It's got to be in the heart, right? I really believe that. So
I would just kind of add on to that. Racism is something that exists in the internal spirit of people. I don't think you can train people out of racism. I think it's an act of your will. You have to make a decision that you're not going to function that way. Part of this is racism tends to happen to people of color, but it doesn't happen with people of color being racist towards people who are not of color, if that makes sense the way I said that. So because racism happens, if you're a Caucasian person, racism is something that happens to somebody else. It doesn't happen to you. It's easier for you not to react to it. Not to say you co-sign it, just that you don't react to it because it's not happening to you. If they're beating somebody up over there on the other side of the city, and I'm on my side of the city, I don't feel it. I'm not getting out of my bed and running over to the other side of the city and getting into a fight with somebody over there. So that's how racism works. We have to admit to ourselves that this is something that exists. And it doesn't matter whether you did it. It doesn't matter whether you called somebody the N-word. It doesn't matter whether you enslaved somebody or your grandparents enslaved somebody. That's not what's important. What's important is you have to challenge yourself not to allow yourself to operate out of a script that judges people based on the color of their skin. You have to judge people, as Martin Luther King said, by the content of their character. And you want to do that both ways. I want to spin this the opposite way, Jimmy, if I can say it this way, right? If you're a person that's walking around with an Applejack, hat on, and you got 95 tattoos, no disrespect for all who are going to have tattoos, but 95 tattoos, and you got big rings and gold chains on and so on, that's a decision that you are making. You mark yourself in terms of how people perceive you by the decision that you are making yourself. You have to own that decision. So if people are looking at you funny because they think you look funny, well, look at yourself and ask yourself, do I look funny, looking like how I'm looking? And then if you don't care, then keep doing what you're doing. But if you care, don't blame somebody else for looking at you as if you're some kind of gangbanger if you make yourself look like a gangbanger. It's that kind of two-way street that we have to deal with. But when I say it's a two-way street, it's not the same level of two-way street. A person who walks around looking like they're a tough guy, they got some kind of gangster, kind of MO that they're operating from, but they're not doing anything to anybody. That's a different kind of affect towards you than somebody who looks at you and says, that's a black person. I'm going to do something to limit that person's life. I'm going to do something to harm that person, something to injure that person. Those are two different realities. The problem here is that all of the institutions of the United States are populated often by people that have extraordinarily racist views that are in their hearts. They don't say it out loud, but it's in their heart. And when they exercise the authority of the administrations that they populate, they exercise that authority in a racist way. If you as a black person are not in those positions of authority in those institutions, you can't do that to somebody else. And in fact, you rarely ever, if ever, find an instance where an African person who's in a position of authority in an administration uses that authority to marginalize the lives of any white people. You never hear that occurring. But you hear that occurring with white people doing that to black people and to brown people. So we have to be honest about that. But I want to take the honesty just one more step. In my belief, regardless of how other people treat you and feel about you, their orientation towards you, you got to find a way to get out of the wilderness yourself. You got to climb over the mountain yourself. You have to collect with other people, and if they won't come with you, you got to stand by yourself. And you got to make a way out of no way. I don't think there's any other permanent answer that works all the time for people of color.
I just want to thank you so much for this time. Jimmy, you're coming from the football background side of things. Nathan, you're coming from the professor world history side of things, also the CEO of the Community Action Organization, doing a lot of things in Buffalo. I hope we were able to come together today to have a conversation that will benefit a lot of people on Juneteenth, to continue to listen and continue to learn about something that's so important to play a part in ending systemic racism. Like you said, Jimmy, it's important to open up your heart to all these things and be open to some uncomfortable conversations that need to happen for all of us. So thank you for the time today. We really appreciate it.